How to Win Friends and Influence People. First published in 1936. When you read this thing, you can see why it is number one. Dale Carnegie writes in this pepped-up style. You don't think of the word moxie much anymore, but when you read this, and this is typical. He writes, in preparation for writing this book, he read everything he could find on the subject, and then he lists all the stuff that he and his trained researcher read to figure out how the great leaders of all ages had dealt with people. He says, I recall that we read over 100 biographies of Theodore Roosevelt alone. We were determined to spare no time, no expense, to discover every practical idea that anyone had ever used throughout the ages for winning friends and influencing people. Anyway, on page 61 of the edition that I have, Dale Carnegie tells one of the many, many stories he uses to illustrate the very main idea that underlies the whole book. He says, I often went fishing up in Maine during the summer. Personally, I am very fond of strawberries and cream, but I have found that for some strange reason, fish prefer worms. So when I went fishing, I didn't think about what I wanted. I thought about what they wanted. I didn't bait the hook with strawberries and cream. Rather, I dangled a worm or a grasshopper in front of the fish and said, wouldn't you like to have that? Why not use the same common sense when fishing for people? To win friends and influence people, Dale Carnegie says over and over in the book, think about what they want. People, he says, are only interested in themselves. And if you can get yourself to the point where you are genuinely interested in them and what they like and what they want, then they will like you and they will do your bidding. Okay, so imagine you are 11 years old and your dad notices that you don't bring many friends around the house, and he takes you aside and he gives you a copy of this actual book. This happened. This happened to Paul Feig growing up in suburban Michigan.
At first, I didn't know what to think. First of all, if you've ever seen the book, it's got this picture of Dale Carnegie on the front, who is, somewhere in his 60s or 70s wearing, those Mr. Menace glasses, the Menace's dad used to wear with this kind of white, slicked back hair. And he looked like every guy that was in my dad's Kiwanis with him. Mm-hmm. And didn't seem to me like a guy who particularly would have that many friends or much influence over people. But he'd written the book. So my father went on to make this speech basically about how now that I was getting older, I was 11 years old, that it was time for me to kind of get social skills that he assumed I didn't have.
Now, in fact, in school, Paul had plenty of friends. He was kind of a class cut-up. And his way of winning friends was the same as other kids. He talked about what they saw on TV, and he tried to be funny. It was just around the house that he was quiet and withdrawn. But he figured, he wanted to be more popular. He wanted more friends. So he decided to try out some of the techniques in the book.
And I went through these, and, principle number one was become genuinely interested in other people. Principle number two was smile. Principle number three was remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language.
Yeah, I was wondering about that one in particular, if as an 11-year-old you tried to employ that one.
Well, the hard thing was when you're 11 years old, the only thing you ever call anybody is by their last name. So I was kind of confused as to whether that sort of applied. And this started a bit of a panic in me because I suddenly didn't know, well, maybe people would like me better if I did that. And so I remember getting to school the next day, and my friend Dave Fleury, who I'd always called Fleury, I remember going up to him going, hey, David, how's it going? And he gave me the strangest look.
Paul used techniques from the book to try to talk to girls, asking them about themselves, what their dads did for a living. Just, showing an interest in them, as the book suggests. And it kind of freaked them out. Because, kids do not talk like that.
And I would sit at lunch with my friends and kind of they would be on a story, and I would want to throw in as I normally would, but kind of went, oh, wait, no, I should sit back and listen and really be attentive. And would nod and go, oh, and then what did your brother do? Oh, he punched you, really? And what happened then? And I became this sort of mini analyst where I was sort of trying to get kids to tell me their innermost secrets. But what happened was my father kept checking in with me at night. And he'd go, so did you read that book? Have you tried any of these things out? So I felt like I needed more proof. And
More proof to take to your dad.
yes, I needed a tangible thing to show my father that I had become popular and was winning friends and influencing people.
So when Paul's teacher decided to do this exercise where they elected a class president, he ran. And he won. And his father was very, very pleased. The book was working. There was just one problem.
One of the things I hadn't banked on was that as class president, I actually had to do something. I was so not into this. I was just hating it because I just wanted to get back to my life with my friends. Well, the teacher was dissatisfied and the students were dissatisfied. And the teacher suddenly decided, well, you know what? And she got up and she said, there's a process in our political system in this country called impeachment. And she looked out and she said, how does everyone feel about our class president, Paul?
What would he say to his father? The whole experience with Dale Carnegie actually left Paul with fewer friends and less influence over people. It was confusing, all the ideas the book put into his head.
I couldn't get out of my head the fact that my dad had given this to me and the fact that he was so concerned that I didn't have friends. And so I started getting nervous, like, well, maybe he's seen something that I don't know. It was strange. I would start to see things that weren't there, like somebody would sort of laugh at what I say and they'd turn away to look at something. And suddenly I was envisioning that as they're turning away with their back to me, they're making this sort of face and rolling their eyes of like, oh, what an idiot. And started noticing in the teacher that when I would raise my hand and answer a question, something in her face that kind of was like she was tolerating me.
You know what's so interesting about that is that the book made you act in a way which was completely phony and calculating. Yeah. And so then the thought entered your head, maybe everybody else is acting phony and calculating as well.
Yeah, it was almost like I'd been given this sort of handbook to the human mind that I didn't want.
Well, from WBEZ Chicago, it's This American Life. I'm Ira Glass. Today on our program, with the new year upon us, people making resolutions, some of them trying to figure out how to be more successful this year than they've been in the past. We ask the question, how do you win friends and influence people? We have stories today of people climbing to be number one. How do they do it? What is the fundamental difference between them and everybody else? We answer that question today in 4 simple lessons that will change your life forever, or possibly won't. Lesson 1, to make a friend, be a friend. David Sedaris has an instructive tale of how, as a boy, with the help of his dad, he tried to bridge the chasm that divides the popular kids from the unpopular. Lesson 2, stay in touch. Yes, my friend, you can learn so many things about being a better friend, a better spouse, a better business person, if you would simply imitate recent U.S. diplomatic and foreign policy. Lesson 3, people like you if you put a lot of time into your appearance. In that lesson, we hear the story of how a simple Superman costume changed one man's life for the better. Lesson 4, just be yourself. Jonathan Goldstein demonstrates how to be bested by the most popular, most handsome, most powerful man in the world and not feel bad about it. Stay with us if you care about your future. This American Life. Today's show is a rerun. How to make friends and influence people. Lesson 1. To make a friend, be a friend. Well, writer David Sedaris tells this story about the popular crowd and how easy it is to enter. This was recorded before a live audience. His story begins on Labor Day when David was a kid at the Raleigh Country Club in North Carolina.
I was in the snack bar listening to a group of 6th graders who lived in another part of town and sat discussing significant changes in their upcoming school year. According to the girl named Janet, neither Pam Dobbins nor J.J. Jackson had been invited to the 4th of July party hosted by the Pyle twins, who later told Kimberly Matthews that both Pam and Mike were out of the picture as far as the 7th grade was concerned. Totally, completely out, Janet said. Poof. I didn't know any Pam Dobbins or J.J. Jackson, but the reverential tone of Janet's voice sent me into a state of mild shock. Call me naive, but it had simply never occurred to me that other schools might have their own celebrity circles. At the age of 12, I thought the group at E.C. Brooks was, if not nationally known, then at least its own private phenomenon. Why else would our lives revolve around them? I myself was not a member of my school's popular crowd, but recall thinking that whoever they were, Janet's popular people couldn't begin to compete with ours. Then I worried that our popular crowd couldn't compare to those in Charlotte or Greensboro, not to mention the thousands of schools located in other states. What if I'd wasted my entire life comparing myself to people who didn't really matter? Try as I might, I still can't wrap my mind around it. They banded together in the 3rd grade. Ann Carlsworth, Christy K. Moore, Deb Bevins, Mike Hollowell, Doug Middleton, Thad Pope. This was the core base of the popular crowd, and for the next 6 years, my classmates and I studied their lives the way we were supposed to study math and English. So complete was their power that I actually felt honored when one of them hit me in the mouth with a rock. He'd gotten me after school, and upon returning home, I ran into my sister's bedroom, hugging my bloody Kleenex and crying, "It was Thad!" Lisa was a year older, but still she understood the significance. "Did he say anything?" she asked. "Did you save the rock?" My father demanded that I retaliate, saying I ought to knock the guy on his ass. "Oh, Dad, oh, baloney. Clock him on the snot locker and he'll go down like a ton of bricks." He was mistaking Thad for a bully, which was a different crowd altogether. Besides, who did my father think I was? Boys who spent their weekends making banana nut muffins did not, as a rule, excel in the art of hand-to-hand combat. "I mean, come on, Dad," Lisa said. "Wake up." The following afternoon, I was taken to Dr. Pavlich for x-rays. The rock had damaged a tooth, and there was some question over who would pay for the subsequent root canal. I figured that since they'd conceived me, given birth, and raised me as a permanent guest in their home, my parents should foot the bill. But my father thought differently. He had decided the popes should pay, and I screamed as he picked up the phone book. "But you can't just call Thad's house." "Why the hell not?" he said. "Don't they have a telephone?" Well, of course the popes had a telephone, probably 3 or 4 with a separate line for the children. I imagined Thad's as a state-of-the-art desk model with blinking red lights alerting him that Doug or Christy was waiting on line 1. Equipment was not the issue. My father's voice simply did not belong on the Pope's telephone. It wouldn't fit with their things. A meeting was arranged for the following evening, and before leaving the house, I begged my father to change his clothes. He'd been building an addition to the carport and wore a pair of khaki shorts, smeared with paint and spotted here and there with bits of dried concrete. Through a hole in his tattered T-shirt, without squinting, it was possible to see his nipple. "What the hell is wrong with this?" he asked. "We're not staying for dinner, so what does it matter?" I yelled for my mother, and in the end, he compromised by changing his shirt. From the outside, Thad's house didn't look much different than anyone else's. Just a standard split level with what my father described as a totally inadequate carport. Mr. Pope answered the door in a pair of sherbet-colored golf pants and led us downstairs into what he called the rumpus room. "Oh," I said, "this is nice." The room was damp and windowless and lit with hanging Tiffany lampshades, the shards of colorful glass arranged to spell the words Bush and Budweiser. Walls were paneled, and the furniture looked as though it had been hand-hewn by settlers who'd reconfigured parts of their beloved Conestoga wagon to fashion such things as easy chairs and coffee tables. He directed us towards a sofa and asked if we wanted anything to drink, Coke, a beer. I didn't want to deplete Thad's precious cola supply, but before I could refuse, my father said sure, we'd have one of each. The orders were called up the stairway, and a few minutes later, Mrs. Pope entered the room, carrying cans and plastic tumblers, and as she set the drinks before us, I noticed that her son had inherited her blunt, slightly upturned nose, which looked good on him but caused her to appear overly suspicious and judgmental. "So," she said, "I hear you've been to the dentist." She was just trying to make small talk, but due to her nose, it came off sounding like an insult, as if I just had a tooth filled and was now looking for someone to pay the bill. "I'll say he's been to the dentist," my father said. "Someone hits you in the mouth with a rock, and I'd say the dentist's office is pretty much the first place a reasonable person would go." Mr. Pope held up his hands. "Whoa now," he said. "Let's just calm things down a little." He yelled upstairs for his son, and when there was no answer, he picked up the phone, telling Thad to stop running his mouth and get his butt down to the rumpus room ASAP. A rush of footsteps on the carpeted staircase, and then Thad sprinted in, all smiles and apologies. The minister had called. The game had been rescheduled. "Hello, sir, and you are?" He looked my father in the eye and firmly shook his hand, holding it in his own for just the right amount of time. With others our age, the gesture appeared forced and sloppy, but Thad seemed born to it. While most handshakes mumbled, his clearly spoke, saying both, "We'll get through this," and "I'm looking forward to your vote this coming November." I thought that seeing him without his group might be unsettling, like finding a single arm on the sidewalk. But Thad was fully capable of operating independently. Watching him in action, I understood that his popularity was not an accident. Unlike a normal human, he possessed an uncanny and wholly natural ability to please people. Much like a Whitman sampler, he seemed to offer a little bit of everything. Pass on his athletic ability, and you might partake of his excellent manners, his confidence, his coltish enthusiasm. Even his parents seemed invigorated by his presence. "All right, then," Mr. Pope said. "Now that everyone's accounted for, I'm hoping we can clear this up. Sticks and stones aside, I suspect this all comes down to a little misunderstanding between friends." I lowered my eyes, waiting for Thad to set his father straight. Friends with him? I expected laughter or the famous Thad snort, but instead he said nothing. And with his silence, he won me completely. A little misunderstanding, that's exactly what it was. The immediate goal was to save my friend, and so I claimed to have essentially thrown myself in the path of Thad's fast-moving rock. "What the hell was he throwing rocks for?" my father asked. "What the hell was he throwing them at?" Mrs. Pope frowned, implying that such language was not welcome in the rumpus room. "I mean, Jesus Christ, the guy's got to be a complete idiot." Thad swore he hadn't been aiming at anything, and I backed him up, saying it was just one of those things we all did, like in Vietnam or whatever. It was just friendly fire. My father asked what the hell I knew about Vietnam, and again Thad's mother winced, saying that boys picked up a lot of this talk by watching the news. "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about," my father said. "What my wife meant," Mr. Pope said. "Oh, baloney." I looked at my father then, a man in dirty shorts who drank his beer from the can rather than pouring it into his tumbler, and I thought, you don't belong here. More precisely, I decided that he was the reason I didn't belong. How was a person expected to fit in when he'd been steadily poisoned by his parents, fed little doses until he was ultimately so contaminated that no one would have anything to do with him? The hokey Greek phrases, the how-to lectures on mixing your own concrete, the squabble over who would pay the stupid dentist bill. Little by little, it had all seeped into my bloodstream, robbing me of my natural ability to please others. "Well," Mr. Pope said, "I can see that this is going nowhere." My father laughed, saying, "Yeah, you got that right." It sounded like a parting sentence, but rather than standing to leave, he leaned back on the sofa and rested his beer can upon his stomach. "We're all going nowhere." At this point, I was pretty sure that Thad and I were envisioning the same grim scenario. While the rest of the world would move on, in a year's time, my filthy, bearded father would still be occupying the rumpus room sofa. Christmas would come, friends would visit, and the popes would bitterly direct them towards one of the easy chairs. Just ignore him, they'd say. He'll go home sooner or later. In the end, they agreed to pay for half the root canal, not because they thought it was fair, but because they wanted us out of their house. Some friendships are formed by a commonality of interests and ideas. You both love judo or camping or making your own sausage. Other friendships are forged by a mutual hatred of a common enemy. On leaving Thad's house, I decided that ours would probably be the latter. We'd start off grousing about my father, maybe going so far as to scratch up his car, and then, little by little, we'd move on to the hundreds of other things and people that got on our nerves. You hate olives? I imagined him saying. I hate them too. As it turned out, the one thing we both hated was me. Rather, I hated me. Thad couldn't even work up the enthusiasm. The day after the meeting, I approached him in the lunchroom where he sat at his regular table, surrounded by his regular friends. Listen, I said, I am really sorry about that stuff with my dad. I'd worked up a whole long speech, complete with imitations, but by the time I hit my second sentence, he turned to resume his conversation with Doug Middleton. Our perjured testimony, my father's behavior, even the rock throwing. I was so far beneath him that it hadn't even registered. Poof. The socialites of E.C. Brooks shone even brighter in junior high, but come 10th grade, things began to change. Desegregation drove a lot of the popular people into private schools, and those who remained seemed silly and archaic, deposed royalty from a country the average citizen had ceased to care about. Early in our junior year, Thad was jumped by a group of the new black kids who yanked off his shoes and threw them in the toilet. I knew I was supposed to be happy, but part of me felt personally assaulted. Yes, he'd been a negligent prince, yet I still believed in the monarchy. When his name was called at graduation, it was me who clapped the longest, outlasting even his parents, who politely stopped once he'd left the stage. I thought about that a lot over the coming years. He's the poet laureate of Liechtenstein, the surgeon who cures cancer with love, the 9th grade teacher who insists that the world is big enough for everyone. When moving to another city, I'm always hoping to find him living in the apartment next door. We'll meet in the hallway and he'll stick out his hand saying, "Excuse me, but shouldn't I know you?" It doesn't have to happen today, but it does have to happen. I've kept a space waiting for him, and if he doesn't show up, I'll have to forgive my father.
David Sedaris, recorded at the Detroit Institute of Art by WDET. He is the author of many fine books. He's on tour this year in New Zealand, Australia, Hawaii, and so many of the 50 states. Find out when he's coming to your town at davidsedarisbooks.com. Coming up, it's okay if you're not Superman, unless, of course, your girlfriend used to date Superman. That's in a minute on Chicago Public Radio when our program continues. This is American Life. I'm Ira Glass. Each week in our program, of course, we choose some theme, bring you different kinds of stories on that theme. Today's show, how to win friends and influence people. We have 4 lessons on the subject today. We've arrived at lesson number 2, stay in touch. Well, the United States of America, of course, does all kinds of things to try to win friends and influence people among the world's nations. We organize sanctions against rogue states. We rally countries on trade issues, and once upon a time on environmental issues. And sometimes you get the sense that when we're rallying nations into a coalition for this or that, U.S. diplomats have to make the kinds of phone calls that are not easy to make. They have to talk to countries that are angry at us for one reason or another. They have to talk to countries that we'd acted all interested in for a while in the past, and then we just kind of stopped calling. Interesting case in point, shortly after September 11th, back in 2001, as the United States tried to organize nations into a coalition to fight the Taliban. The Secretary of State back then, Colin Powell, was in the paper saying things like, our sudden interest in Pakistan was not, quote, just a temporary spike in American interest, that we had, quote, an enduring commitment, and that Pakistan was, quote, a great Muslim nation. Which makes you wonder, what were those first phone calls like back then? Well, back in 2001, when we first broadcast today's show, one of our contributors, Tammy Sager, tried to imagine exactly that.
Hi, Pakistan. Hi, it's America. How are you? Oh my God. I almost didn't recognize your voice. It's been so long. Listen, I was just getting together this little coalition, and I was like, oh, who have I not seen for Pakistan? Oh, yeah. Well, how are you? How's Kashmir? That's yours, right? Oh, you're kidding me. Now, when I think of Kashmir, I think it's yours. Seriously, just straight out, Pakistani Kashmir. Oh, God. Well, we will see you at the coalition then. Oh, God, I can't believe I forgot this. Also wondering maybe if you could bring along some full exchange of intelligence and use of ports. No big deal if you forget, but if you do, that would be great. All right. Okay, see you soon. India. It's America. Yes. You remember? Hi. No, I have been thinking about calling you. Like every night I was like, gotta call India. But you know, the time difference. Oh, how are you? How's Kashmir? You're kidding. No. Come on. That's yours, isn't it? So how are you? Listen, getting together a little coalition. Wondering if you'd be up to join. Who? Pakistan? I didn't even think of calling them. Well, do you want me to? Because I will. Well, I don't know. I don't care. Well, this is about you, India. Yes, it is. Okay, we'll see you real soon. Love you. Is that weird to say? It doesn't feel weird. Okay, bye-bye. Hello, may I please speak to Iran? Hi, it's America. Hi. Yeah. God, it feels so weird to talk to you again. I know we haven't talked, God, since the hostage crisis, and that was just... Well, it was one of those things where it was just, it was easier to just stay away and just sort of repair myself a little bit. So, and I just figured you're in the same place. Maybe I'll see you. Maybe I'll fly overhead in your airspace, okay? Don't freak out if I do. All right. Talk to you soon. Bye. Hello, China. Hi, it's America. Hi, this is hard. I wanted to apologize, about the plane. Yes, I'm so sorry. Yeah, and about the embassy blew up, and about that fishing boat. Oh my God, you're right, it was Japan. I'm so, no, you do not look alike. I'm sorry. No, that is me being a big fat jerk. I am so sorry. Well, now I feel like twice a jerk. Okay. Listen, I am getting together a coalition and wondering if you'd be up for it. Oh, good. No, you know what? I know you share a border with Afghanistan, so I don't want that to be weird because I'm not inviting them. But if you could come, that would be great. Okay, really look forward to seeing you. You know what? I bet in an hour I'm going to want to call you again. No, I'm just kidding. That's a terrible joke, but I know I make it every time. Okay, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Tammy Sager, she is a performer and writes for TV, most recently on the brand new show They Call It Late Night with Jason Kelsey.